So we all have a choice to make, and that's why we all are accountable for the way we live. And that's why, I mean, the whole reason why there's Judgment Day is because we could have done otherwise. If we are sinners by default, if we are sinners by force, or because we can't, it's unavoidable, then how could God be just in judging us for that?
Isn't that the objection, like the exact word for word objection raised in Romans 9 when he says, "Is God therefore unjust? How can he find fault if we resist his will?"
Yeah. So Romans 9 is talking about corporate election, and he goes through several examples of that. First, he starts with Abraham. He chose Abraham out of everybody else in the world, right? It wasn't because Abraham was righteous. Abraham was living in a pagan country. I'm assuming he was a pagan himself. Then he chose Isaac over Ishmael. Then he chose Jacob over Esau. And this is not choosing for salvation, personal salvation. This is choosing that they would be the line that the Messiah would come through. Okay, they'd be the chosen people,
Right.
the chosen nation. And this is where it gets to verse 14. What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Certainly not. Unrighteousness in what way? In him choosing people, not for personal individual salvation to go to heaven instead of hell, but he's choosing them. They're going to be the line, they're the chosen line that is going to be the line that Messiah comes through, who will offer salvation to all. And then he gets into the example of Moses and Pharaoh. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. Now, do you know when he said that, or what the context is for him quoting that?
Oh, I don't know what it's quoting, no.
Yeah. So I would encourage you, if you go through Romans 9 on your own time and study it, every single quote from the Old Testament, and there's lots here, go back and read what it says in context. And I think it'll provide you a lot of insight to what Romans 9 is really saying. But he says this about Moses after the Israelites sin. And they deserve to be, he was even threatening to start over with just Moses. And then he asks God to reveal himself to him. And he does say, I will have mercy on whoever I have mercy, and compassion on whoever I want compassion. He's talking about the Israelites who he could have condemned, he could have destroyed and wiped out and started over, but he chose not to because of all the promises to the patriarchs, and also because he simply chose to have compassion on them. That's what he's
Yeah,
doing there.
that's my understanding
Yeah.
of how it's set up in Romans 9 too.
Okay. Okay. Then verse
Is that
16.
if sure, yeah, keep
It
going.
says, it says, so then it is not of him who wills, nor of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. That's not talking about personal individual salvation either. It's simply referring back to the previous verse, where it's not because Israel was righteous, not because they are willing to obey God, because they were wicked at that point in time. Even though they had experienced the crossing of the Red Sea and everything at that point in time, they were still wicked. But God showed mercy on them. That's the reason they stayed alive, right? And then he talks about Pharaoh. For the scripture says to the Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. Now, if you go back to Exodus and you study this, I think it's Exodus 7 through 14, and you study the 10 plagues and everything that happened, you'll see that there are times that Pharaoh himself hardens his heart, and there are other times that God hardens his heart. If you go to the Hebrew,
Right.
it's actually different words being used. When the Pharaoh hardens his heart, it's literally like harden. But when God says God hardens Pharaoh's heart, really, I don't understand why they transfer harden every single time. It says strengthen. And I believe the reason why it says that about God, how he responds to Pharaoh, he wants to strengthen him. He didn't have to give Pharaoh a wicked heart. Pharaoh already was wicked. He didn't have to
Right.
make Pharaoh sin. Pharaoh was already a sinner and already hated the Jews and hated their God and didn't want to let him go. But he needed to strengthen him so that he would continue to do what he wanted to do and get to the 10th plague. Now, all the plagues were important, but the 10th plague was the most important because in the 10th plague, what happens there is that the Passover is instituted. And the Passover is pointing forward to Christ, a shadow of Christ dying on the cross. Okay? And then we see, and I think this is the verse you're talking about, verse 18. Therefore, he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills, he hardens. So that's talking about, once again, he has mercy on Israel, even though they were wicked. He chose to have mercy on them. Now, once again, not talking about personal individual salvation. And the Pharaoh, he chose to harden or strengthen his heart to continue all the way through the 10th plague. And then it says, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? So now that we reread this verse, we know it's not talking about personal individual salvation. It's talking about all these events he's been discussing all throughout Romans 9 up to this point.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about the individual versus nation, because I know that's sort of at the heart of the Romans 9 dispute. Um, there's sort of two questions I have. The first is about why, when he's answering one of these objections, he says, "Who are you, oh man?" as if he's talking about people rather than nations. But then my second question is, what does it mean to prepare a nation as a vessel of wrath, or to prepare a nation as a vessel of righteousness?
Well, I mean, we just read through what happened with Moses, the Israelites, and Egypt. I mean, I think that's a perfect example.
Right, but what
Where
is preparing a if God prepares a nation to be a vessel of wrath? Like, what is that? Because I understand if we're talking about individuals, you can look at it from kind of a reform perspective. But if we're talking about nations, I can't really wrap my head around what does it mean for God to prepare a nation to be a vessel of wrath?
Well, again, that's exactly what he did with Egypt. He unleashed his wrath upon them. They would not let his people go. And so I mean, the 10 plagues pretty much wiped them out. And then the whole army went drowning in the Red Sea. They're objects of his wrath. Whereas the Israelites, on the other hand, received his mercy, even though they didn't deserve it.
Yeah, I see. And then what about the oh man part?
Yeah, so that's referring to the verse 19. It's a hypothetical statement. He says, you will say to me then. This is something that he's assuming his readers will have a statement. They'll say something like this, right?
Okay, yeah. I see
And
what you mean.
that's what verse 20 is talking. It's referring back to verse 19.
Okay. If the hardening here is really a reaction to what the person is already doing, right? Like a strengthening their heart disposition already.
Yep.
How do we reconcile that with it is not according to human will or effort, but on God whom has mercy? Those two things seem to be in contradiction. But then also, what would we even think would be unjust about that? I mean, Paul assumes we're going to hear this and think it's unjust, but if we take that view of they're already living in wickedness and God just leaves them in it, well, that doesn't seem unjust. That actually seems just. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so, kind of. But verse 16, I think that's what you're talking about. He says, so then it's not of him who wills, nor of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. Once again, it's referring back to verse 15. That's a quote from the book of Exodus, where God, once again, is about to destroy the nation of Israel and start over with Moses, and he chooses not to. He chooses not to. Now,
Right.
justice in that situation would say, wipe them out, destroy
Yeah.
them. So justice says, but it's not of him who wills, of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. So God has chosen in that situation, he chose to show mercy, and they didn't deserve it, right? So that is what he's talking about there in verse 16, once again.
Right. Yeah. Let me rephrase the question then, because I'm more asking about talking about how the hardening, when God hardens someone, that is a reacting to what they're already doing, right? Like you said, strengthening of their wickedness already. But what is the injustice in that? I mean, that seems the apparent injustice would be if God made them hardened, right? I don't see what's unjust about God simply letting them harden themselves and then the hardening being a response to their decision.
Well, like I said, he strengthened them. He didn't have to strengthen them, but he had a great purpose in making them go through all 10 plagues especially the 10th plague. And there are other things that happen in the midst of that as well. Like when the Israelites left, they plundered the Egyptians. And when Israel was going through the wilderness into the promised land, other nations heard about it and were fearful because of what their God did to Egypt. And really, a lot of those plagues were representing the false gods Egypt had too. So it was coming against their gods. And so the God of the Israelites destroyed the gods of the Egyptians and delivered them, even though they were slaves. And so there's lots of things that were happening there, why he would do that. And they, I mean, who might try to find fault with that? Well, who might try to find fault with that is the Egyptians and Pharaoh. That he would give them the strength to do that when they were running out of strength. I'm talking about physical strength now, because there was a point in time when even his own magicians, the Pharaoh, said, "This is the finger of God, stop it." And he kept on going. Right? He was running out, everybody's running out of strength. So that maybe that's what it's talking about when it comes to the justice thing. But what verse are you talking about justice?
When it's one of Paul's anticipated objections when he says, like, what shall we say to this? Is God unjust? Because who can resist his will?
Okay, so I think verse 19, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of.
Okay, so once again, they're going to, if the Egyptians are the ones who have this preconceived thought and who he's responding to, maybe they're the ones who would think that and say that. But I don't know exactly who he's referring to. But if you go through the whole passage, verse by verse, once again, going back to the Old Testament passages, reading them in context, being diligent to read through Exodus and what happened there, and then come back to this, I think you're going to see it clearly.
Yeah, it's an issue that I've wanted to learn more about, because the facial reading seems like it's talking about individual election, but then I know there's the whole, deeper Old Testament ties, and that's where sort of the nation's argument comes from. So I'm just trying to learn more about it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually have a YouTube channel. If you go to refutingcalvinism.com, it'll take you to that YouTube channel where it talks about. I have a video on Romans 9, I have a video on Ephesians 1, a video on John 6, I have a video about Pharaoh hardening his heart. You'll see all these teaching videos there that discuss these things.
Okay.
And Jake, I appreciate your chat. I think we're going to move on to some other ones. If someone else who wants to come up too. But
Sure.
I appreciate
Yeah.
your
Thanks for
kindness
having
in
me.
the chat. Good talking to you, man.